A BBC Sounds and BBC World Service original podcast, Untold Legends.
Hi, and thanks for listening to Untold Legends Aura. My name is Crystal Genesis, and I'm the executive producer of the podcast, and I run Stance Studios, the company that made this series for the BBC. Welcome, and thanks so much for listening. We've loved hearing feedback from our listeners, and it's been wonderful to hear how much Aura's story has meant to people, as telling this story has meant so much to us. So in this bonus episode, we thought we'd take you behind the curtain a little and speak to Renee, our wonderful host, about Aura and what making this series has been like. Renee, hello, how are you?
What's up with it?
How's it going?
Everything is good. I'm so excited. We've been talking for a long time, but this is the first time we're talking in front of everyone. So what's up, Crystal?
I know, exactly. And thank you so much for being involved in this project. And yeah, it's so exciting to get to this bonus episode and really connect and talk about how it's been for you. But I want to get straight to it, really. Are there any key words that come to mind when you think about Aura's story?
Yeah, I would think the first word that comes to mind is perseverance. I mean, when you, like me being an athlete myself, everything I did was to make sure I was prepared for the game, prepared for practice, prepared to go. And it seemed like in Aura's life, that was a bonus to be able to play her sports plural, because there was multiple, but she had so many different things. She was working a regular job. She was still performing all of her life duties and then going to the tennis court and trying to perform. So perseverance is definitely what comes to mind for me.
And also, when you were going through all the scripts and checking and tweaking, when you were doing this and also recording, were there any stories from your own life that it brought up?
I would definitely say accessibility. You know, like when you look at Aura, when she moved, that's when she got more opportunity because she was next to, the YWCA, and she was next to people that would give her access and would give her opportunity. So I would say that brought up, memories in my life, because when I was playing, obviously I lived in West Virginia, but we would travel around so that I could play other competitions so that college coaches could see me. So that felt very familiar in a sense of going out to more city-like areas to make sure that you could compete.
And what do you think Black female athletes today can learn from Aura's story?
It's interesting because she was playing hoping to make a difference. She was playing knowing that she was one of the best, and she honestly held herself to a higher standard than anyone around her. She kept on pushing herself. She wanted to be the best. She even played past, I would say, her prime and was beating folks, and I think that shows mental fortitude. So I would just say for Black female athletes today, we just need to make sure that we remember people's stories like Aura, because they laid the foundation for us to be able to do what we're doing now.
So Renee, I want to get your response to a photo that came up in our research. Have a look. Have you been able to open it?
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I see it. Well, I know that this is a basketball team. So there's a group of young girls, and then it looks like Aura is still holding it down. She may be a little bit older than most of the group. I can see Tribune on their shirt, so we know that was the newspaper at the time that sponsored them. It's actually a pretty crazy photo. There's some knee pads. Some players have some knee pads on.
Yeah.
The knee pads look like they need to be renewed, but I'm sure resources weren't a thing back then, so they just played with what they had. But this is actually kind of a crazy photo to see. Man, there's a ball there. The ball looks like it probably has no grip, but they probably were still getting buckets with it. Man, this is a wild photo to see.
You're a basketball star and now co-owner of the basketball team Atlanta Dream. When you look at this picture, what does it make you think or feel, considering you've been in the same position as Aura?
I wonder if, what it was like for them. For basketball, for me, it became everything. By the age of 10, I was taking it very serious. I was already planning on trying to get a college scholarship, and that was just by the age of 10. So I wonder for them if they were able to take it as serious. That's what I think about when I see these photos. They look intense. I can look in their face, and they look intense as they're posing. So I'm just curious, were they able to take it as serious as they wanted to? I know they weren't. So that's tough, because you always want to be the best that you can at your craft. And I just don't know if they had that opportunity.
Can you tell me a bit about your own story and how you got into basketball? I know you started the game pretty young as a child, back in West Virginia. Tell me about what little Renee was up to.
By 10, I was full on serious. So I would say that's when I definitely knew that this is what I wanted to do. Every day I was outside training, working on my basketball handles, working on dribbling, working on shooting. Like every single day I was trying to get better. So that's when I knew that I was taking it serious. On the days when I couldn't get to the court, I was thinking through the game. I was thinking about the plays. I was trying to just make sure that I'm staying sharp. So I would say around 10, I was all in. And I'm thankful too because my parents allowed me to be able to pour into basketball. You know, they would know that every day I was going to go outside, and a lot of times, most times my Diddy, which is what I call my dad, he would be out there after he got off of work. So I would have to come home from school, make sure I had all my homework done, and then I was able to just practice as long as I wanted until the sun went down, and then I had to come in, eat, and do all those normal things. But yeah, my Diddy, that he trained with me every single day.
And in Aura's story, the idea of whether competitive sport is suitable for women comes up again and again. If you remember, one of our guests, Professor Todd Mealy, calls it the porcelain doll theory. Essentially, that women are too delicate to play demanding physical sports. Was that attitude still present when you were a kid? And how did you handle it?
I don't think it was still present when I was a kid, but there's still remnants of it in a sense of how people view women's sports. Some sports fans view women's sports as not as good as the men's sports. And the reason that they do that is I'm assuming because they think that women don't play as physical as men, they can't jump as high as men, and all these various things. But the physical attributes of the game don't necessarily tell the full story of the game. So I do think that there's still some theories out there about women and sport and how well we can play it. So, you know, when I was younger, I played on an all-boys team. And in my city, they wouldn't actually let me play on the boys team, so I had to go to the city next to us to play. But, you know, I don't know for what reason they didn't want me to play. Maybe because they're like, oh, well, there's no other girls playing in here, and we don't maybe want you to get hurt, or for whatever reasons. But I did start out playing on an all-boys team.
In episode 5, we hear how even other female players saw Aura as mannish because she didn't present herself as conventionally feminine. Do you see the same kind of pressure affecting players today in your team, the Atlanta Dream?
You know, I don't, and I better not, because I would make sure that that doesn't happen in a sense of I would speak up. I think that now how players are expressing themselves, players are being their full authentic selves. You know, we have players from all walks of life. We have players that have such different personalities, similar to the personalities that we saw in that photo, you know, with Aura and her team. There's so many ways that we can embrace different cultures, and that's what we do now in the WNBA. But I can still see on the internet, there are still people that have pressures about how people look, and on the internet there are still those criticisms. But as far as what happens in the media and what happens on the team, that doesn't happen on our team, but I'm not saying that it doesn't happen at all anymore.
It's interesting you just mentioned the media, because I'm also interested, you know, are there any echoes of Aura's story in terms of how Black female basketball players are treated in the media today?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. You know, there was a study done a couple years ago that showed that if you're a Black basketball player, even if the basketball player that's Black got more accolades that season, they may not get as much media attention. And so there's been basically some research done to prove that there are still remnants of how Black players are treated in the media. And that's just something that we're going to have to continue to raise awareness to and try to change. And, you know, something else that stuck out to me was how her basketball team and her basketball career was really supported by Black media. Her actual team was sponsored by the Philadelphia Tribunes, which was the Black newspaper at the time, and they covered all of the games. They covered her career because they were the sponsors for her team most of the time. And so that to me was beautiful. You know, it made me think about the ATA when it came to tennis, but just the Black community supporting their own is a beautiful thing.
Truly. But also, I'd really like to know how you got into co-owning the Atlanta Dream basketball team.
For a player to become co-owner and vice president of a team that they just played for, it isn't very common. But to me, I always say, think about who you would want working for your company, or think about who you would want to lead your company. It should be somebody that's already been a part of it, given their blood, sweat, and tears to it. That's what athletes are. You know, since I was 10, I've given my everything to the game of basketball. So who better would you want than an athlete now to try to continue to push the game forward? I love the WNBA because I aspired to play in it. I've worked for the WNBA. And so that's something to me that it just felt like a natural progression. And maybe it isn't very common to see a Black woman sitting in an ownership suite, but I hope that we start to see that more and more.
A big theme in our podcast has been the ways that racism and white supremacy prevented Aura from demonstrating her true potential and stopped her from getting the awards and recognition for her ability. How much does that still resonate for you in your career or the career of others coming up? What stories have you heard?
It's interesting, especially the state that we're in right now with everything going on in the political realm and everything going on socially, that race is a big topic right now. Race is one of the main topics. And so it's kind of crazy to see that there's so many years that have passed between Aura's story and present day. But then when you look at it, there's a lot of things that still remain the same. There are still remnants of racism and different rewarding things. Like I just talked about the media, the coverage, the amount, like, I'm not saying that all the coverage is based on racism, but we can also say that, there should be more. I'm not going to say that it's white supremacy that's stopping the media coverage, but I will say that there should be more. So for me, it's like, I don't know what reason that women, minorities, or whoever are not getting a certain amount of media coverage or attention or awards, but I will say that there should be more.
And are there any instances in your own career where you've seen the impact of anti-Blackness?
For me, one of the best things about playing sports is that the numbers don't lie. So a lot of times if I was in West Virginia and maybe the newspapers didn't cover our game the way that maybe they should have, to me, you can just figure everything out in between the lines. That's how I think about it. So winning cures all. And so there may have been times where there wasn't the coverage that was assumed, or, that my parents, would tell people that I'm probably going to go to a big D1 school, and people in West Virginia didn't even believe them. So there's that. But for me, winning cures all. And so everything can be figured out on the court.
So you retired in 2021 from sport to focus on activism and racial injustice. Now, for those who don't know the story of your activism, can you tell us about the day you finally made the decision? What was the trigger, Renee?
Yeah, so when I opted out in 2020 and didn't go to the WNBA bubble, we called it the Wubble for the WNBA fans. But when I decided not to go to the Wubble, the main reason was because I felt like there was so much energy here in Atlanta and there was just so much going on. And there was a lot of civil unrest. And I'm like, what am I going to be able to do inside the bubble? Because I don't feel like I'll be productive. I know that I'm a player that plays with passion and energy. So if I'm not able to have that passion and energy for basketball because I'm worried about other things, then I don't need to be playing basketball. And then after that year in 2021, I started to realize that there were some things developing and that I may be able to become a co-owner of the Atlanta Dream. And so you can't be a WNBA player and a WNBA owner at the same time. So that's when in 2021, I decided that I wanted to retire from the game of basketball to try to become an owner of the Atlanta Dream. And so that to me was everything because yes, I love the sport. Yes, I love the game of basketball. But being able to become a co-owner of a professional sports league, that's something that only happens rarely. It's a generational thing. And so it's something that now in our family of the Montgomerys is something that we can have, for as long as we want.
Now, we don't know how Aura identified herself, but what we do know is that other people believe she was queer. We also know that she received homophobic abuse from other players at the time. What struck you about that part of her story?
What struck me about that part was how it seemed like she was unapologetically her. A lot of times when you hear stories about that, you hear about people that lived in fear or were very careful to make sure that people didn't know, or that they were, would call them their roommate or be very cryptic about how they went about it. But it seemed like with Aura, her nephew was like, oh yeah, she was happy and living over there, and so it seemed like she was living her best life in her own world, regardless of the abuse that she was receiving.
You're married to a woman, Serena Grace. Do you think, though, that this has altered how people treat you within your career as well?
Yeah, it's interesting because this is probably going to be a little bit surprising, but I think that, people treated me different in a good way. I didn't know that when you settle down and you start to have a family, people look at you as more stable and people look at you as like having things together. Times have changed since Aura and now to present day 2022 me, but there's still struggles. I'm not going to say that it was all easy go lucky because there are still perceptions of people that they may not ever say anything to me to my face, but I know that there's still some type of feelings there from people. But for me, it's been everything. My wife Serena is who actually is the first one that threw out the idea of becoming a co-owner and vice president of the Atlanta Dream. So to me, that changed everything. That changed my life.
On your podcast, Montgomery and Company, one of your taglines is, "It's a generational thing." You also spoke to two of Aura's surviving relatives,
Yes.
her great-nephew and great-niece. What struck you about them? And also tell me a bit more about It's a Generational Thing.
Yeah, with our podcast, I'm the host and the co-host is my wife Serena, my sister Nicole, and my mom, who I call Snook. And for us, it is a generational thing. The reason that we say it's a generational thing is because all of the business that we do, we hope that my son, my niece, my nephews, all the generations coming after us can reap the benefits of it. And so when I was speaking with Aura's, surviving relatives, her great nephew and her great niece, what stuck out to me is that they probably don't know how amazing or how incredible what the things that their aunt was doing. We're talking about Aura right now. We're telling her untold legend story. We're talking about all the accolades. We're talking about all the greatness. And there's not much media around it. There's not much for them to Google about it. So how would they even know? How would they know how great she is if there's nowhere to research about it? There's nobody talking about it. So to me, that's really what stuck out to me. And that's why I wanted to make sure they knew that their aunt was a legend.
Do you see a big difference between athletes who are lucky enough to have a strong family support and those that don't?
It's interesting because some of the greatest athletes that didn't have family support. A lot of the greatest athletes that we know had a very tough road to get to where they're going. I don't necessarily think that there's a difference or a recipe because sometimes those athletes that had a very difficult road or didn't have support, that was their driving force. That was their gasoline. That was what gave them energy. It was proving people wrong, or it was getting to where people said they couldn't get to. And then there's people that had tremendous support from their family like me, and that was my driving force. I wanted to prove my family right. I wanted to prove everybody that supported me and that, cheered for me along the way. I wanted to show them that you were cheering for the right person. So it could go either way with athletes because athletes, if people don't know, use everything as fuel.
How much of a difference do you think family made in Aura's life?
I feel like family was Aura's foundation. You could just tell, when you grow up on a farm or when you grow up in such a tight-knit group of working together, working hard together. I can't emphasize that enough, that working hard together, something about that brings people together. So when you look at Aura and how her family dynamics were, I feel like family was everything to Aura, and you can tell just by how she went about life. You could assume that sometimes maybe she didn't have to work her regular job of, her domestic job, but it seems like she was working because she probably wanted to help her family or wanted to do different things. So it just seems like Aura, to me, family was a big base for her.
And if you could ask Aura one question, I know that's really, really tricky.
Just one?
Just one, what would it be?
I think I would want to ask Aura, what does she want us to know? There's probably one thing that she probably was like, you guys are probably saying all of these things and yes, they're true, but you don't even know this. It's like, there's probably one thing that she could just drop on our laps that would make our jaws drop and hit the floor. And that we would just be like, you were doing that while trying to excel at the highest level. So I would just want to know, what's something that we would be shocked to find out? Because I'm sure that everything that was shocking that we did find out, and Crystal, we found out some very shocking things. I still think that we're not even scratching the surface.
You're so right on that. I would love to know that. Now, what do you think you've learned from tracing her story in such depth?
It was really cool to see how sports developed, especially how sports developed in the Black community, how people trained, the YWCA, how that became a training facility for some. It was just interesting to see how sport developed, because for us, sport has always been organizational. There's leagues. I went to go play for the boys league. There was already a league there, though. It wasn't a league being formed that I'm trying to play in. So for me, that was very interesting just to see how Harlem showed up, how it was an event, how everyone was dressed from head to toe, because Harlem still dresses from head to toe. So it was interesting to see that, okay, Harlem been Harlem since Harlem. So it's just like really cool to just see the different ways that communities just build together.
Actually, Jordan, our sound engineer, and me are nodding right now because we're in East Harlem right
for
now.
real? What? That's what's up.
We've been looking at an untold legend. Do you think a future Black female athlete as talented as Aura could get lost and forgotten in history?
I think that will never happen again. In the age of social media, in the age of technology, in the age of, we're going to a whole different Web3 at this point. There's too many ways to receive information. There's too many ways to find information. There's too many people putting information on the internet that someone can get lost like Aura. I pray not, because I don't even understand how Aura's story got disappeared. Like I still can't understand that someone that was sponsored by a newspaper, like that's the Philadelphia Tribunes was a newspaper. So how in the world can a story get lost when the people that were following it were the actual media? So, but then that tells the story of where Black media was placed in mainstream media. That's how things get lost, when stories get told and retold in a different light by a different media that maybe wasn't there. I would hope that in this age of technology that could never happen again.
Thank you so much, Renee Montgomery, the host of Untold Legends Aura.
This was so awesome. Thank you guys so much. It's been a pleasure to work on this project with you.
Thank you so much. We've come to the end of this discussion, and I'm Crystal Genesis. Thank you for listening.
From BBC Sounds and the BBC World Service, this is our bonus episode of Untold Legends Aura. Untold Legends is a Stance Studios production for BBC Sounds and the BBC World Service. And I'm your host, Renee Montgomery. And thank you so much for listening.